My name is Lucy. I'm 31 years old, and I used to work as a credit officer at a small bank in North Carolina. My husband boarded a first-class flight to Hawaii at 7:15 a.m. on a Thursday. Not because we couldn't afford 2 tickets, but because he was secretly taking his mistress and his mother to plan my financial ruin. He left me behind to care for his paralyzed, nonverbal younger sister. It was the perfect setup to keep me trapped in the house while he erased my future. But there was one thing my husband forgot to consider. His sister wasn't paralyzed. And at exactly 9:41 a.m. the next morning, she stood up from her wheelchair, looked me directly in the eye, and spoke 4 words that shattered my reality. My face burned so hot I could feel my pulse in my teeth. My hands were trembling, gripping my coffee mug so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't know it then, but what I did next would destroy the life he thought he was building. He never saw it coming. Before I continue, if you end up liking this story, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with it. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, let me take you back to 2 years ago when everything started. If someone had asked me at 25 if I had big dreams, the answer would have been yes. I wanted to be a singer. I wanted to stand on a stage and make an entire room fall into a deep, beautiful silence just to listen to every note. But reality quickly woke me up. At 26, I took a stable job as a credit officer in Raleigh, making exactly $62,000 a year. It wasn't my dream job, but it paid off my student loans, and it kept a roof over my head. I was alone, but I was secure. I met Nathan at a college reunion party hosted by a mutual friend. He was 30 at the time, working for a financial consulting firm in Charlotte. He had an easy laugh and a charming way of speaking. More importantly, he understood the dream I had set aside. Nathan told me he used to be part of a dance crew in college. He said he gave it up to take a corporate job because his family demanded it. I thought we were the same. 2 people who had traded their passions for paychecks just to survive. My mother kept asking when I would finally settle down. I wasn't entirely ready for marriage, but Nathan's affection softened my hesitation. He planned outdoor dinners. He bought me a $350 pair of noise-canceling headphones because he noticed I still loved to hum while doing chores. A year later, we got married. The wedding cost $45,000, and his mother, Linda, insisted on paying for all of it. I thought it was a generous gift. I didn't realize it was a down payment on my obedience. After the wedding, I quit my job at the bank. Nathan made a generous salary and told me I deserved time to rest after years of grinding. I genuinely believed I owed them my gratitude, but it wasn't long before the reality of his family structure revealed itself. Nathan had a younger half-sister named Ivy. She was 28 years old. His family told me that Ivy had suffered severe nerve damage after a high fever when she was 8. Since then, they said she couldn't speak or walk. At first, my heart broke for her. A young woman bound to a bed and a wheelchair for the rest of her life. But strangely, Ivy didn't seem as sorrowful as I had imagined. Though she couldn't speak, she communicated through drawings and a letterboard. I was hesitant in the beginning, but I learned to understand Ivy through her eyes, her smile, and her gentle gestures. I remember sitting with her on the back porch one afternoon. I pointed to the sky and drew a musical note in the air with my finger. Ivy smiled and drew a heart on her sketch pad. I laughed and signed the words, "You understand me?" She nodded slowly. Her eyes sparkled like we had just shared a secret. If Ivy was a gentle light in that family, my mother-in-law was a quiet storm. Linda always looked at me with a calculating gaze. It felt like I was a defective product still within the return window. Every time I stepped into her house, I felt like I was taking a surprise exam. "Don't leave Nathan's shoes lying around like that," she'd say, her voice dripping with disapproval. "He looks like someone with no job. If your husband looks like that, who's going to respect his wife?" I would force a smile, my hands trembling slightly as I quickly placed the shoes back into the closet. Everything in Linda's house had to be arranged perfectly. towels folded left to right, laundry hung by exact color order. I was no stranger to perfectionism, but the way Linda wielded it always made me feel incredibly small. To her, Nathan was the golden child. I, despite being legally his wife, was just an outsider brought in to maintain his image. We lived in a small apartment just a 20-minute drive from Nathan's parents' home. Somehow, Linda always knew exactly when I was home alone. She would show up unannounced at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, carrying a bag of groceries and a list of critiques. I once thought marriage meant having a peaceful sanctuary, but gradually, I realized I had entered a family with an invisible, ironclad hierarchy. Every word was weighed to please Linda, and my sacrifices were simply treated as expected duties. I don't remember exactly when the shift in Nathan happened. Maybe it was 6 months after our first anniversary. He stopped smiling when I handed him his morning coffee. He stopped texting at 1 p.m. to ask if I had eaten lunch. The little things that once made me feel loved were systematically erased. Nathan started coming home at 9 p.m. or later. He blamed long meetings or claimed his boss needed him to review compliance documents. On those nights, I ate dinner alone. I stared at my cold plate, convincing myself he was just stressed with work, but the distance between us grew cold and obvious. When I asked questions, he dismissed them. When I stayed silent, he never reached out. As Nathan grew distant, I found myself growing closer to Ivy. I visited her often. Linda openly disapproved of my presence, but I didn't care. Every time I arrived, Ivy was waiting by the window with her sketch pad ready. I started teaching myself sign language in the evenings after Nathan went to sleep. At first, I only learned basic signs. But soon, it became a bridge between me and Ivy. When we spoke with our hands, it felt like escaping a frozen world where Linda's sharp criticisms constantly echoed in my head. "I don't understand why Nathan chose someone like you," Linda said one evening at 6:30 p.m. I had just finished helping Ivy tidy her room. "Ivy might like you, but that doesn't mean I have to." I didn't respond. With Linda, silence was the only acceptable form of survival. Every word she uttered felt like a calculated attempt to break me down. And Nathan never defended me. Every time I brought up her cutting remarks, he would just shrug. "That's just how Mom is," he'd say. "Get used to it." Eventually, I stopped telling him, and he stopped asking. The inciting incident happened on a quiet Sunday morning. It was 8:14 a.m. I was making breakfast when Nathan walked into the kitchen looking uneasy. He set his phone face down on the granite counter. "Lucy, do you have any plans for next week?" he asked, his tone oddly hesitant. I stopped stirring the eggs and looked at him. My heart started to beat a little faster. He hadn't asked about my schedule in months. "I don't have anything planned," I said. "Why?" Nathan paused. "My family just decided to take a trip to Hawaii. My parents and me too." For a fraction of a second, I felt a spark of excitement. Hawaii was where we had originally planned to spend our second anniversary, but that brief warmth evaporated the moment I registered his cold expression. "So, what about me?" I asked. My voice was steady, but the sting of rejection was already rising in my throat. Nathan stared down at the floor tiles. "Lucy, this time it's just a family trip. Actually, there's something important I want to ask you. My family would like to ask you to stay home and take care of Ivy while we're gone." I froze. Disappointment crashed over me like ice water. I knew we were distant, but I never imagined he would exclude me so blatantly. "Take care of Ivy?" I repeated, disbelief leaking into my tone. "Why not bring her along?" Nathan sighed heavily. "Mom said it would be too difficult for Ivy to travel that far. Plus, she thinks you're the best person to care for her. You're close to Ivy, right?" He delivered that last sentence carefully, weaponizing my affection for his sister to back me into a corner. And right then, at exactly 8:22 a.m., the doorbell rang. Nathan practically ran to answer it. A minute later, Linda stepped into my kitchen. She wore her usual stern expression, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. I believe Nathan already explained everything to you, Lucy, she said, her sharp eyes locking onto mine. Do you have any objections? I was boiling inside. The disrespect was so loud it was deafening, but I smiled faintly. I nodded. No, of course not. I'd be happy to take care of Ivy. Linda nodded, deeply satisfied. Nathan refused to look at me. After Linda went outside to wait by the car, Nathan whispered, I'm sorry, Lucy. Everything's already been arranged. Sounds like you made your decision before asking me, I said quietly. Nathan walked out quickly, leaving me alone in the kitchen. I stood there surrounded by a heavy, suffocating silence. I had given up my career, my independence, and my pride to please this family. This was my reward, but I didn't know it then. That exact moment of abandonment was the beginning of my freedom. What happened next changed everything. That afternoon, I drove to my in-laws' house to sit with Ivy. She was by the window, her eyes lighting up the moment I walked in. I sat beside her and gently signed, I'm going to stay here with you for a few days. Ivy looked up suddenly. Her fingers moved quickly as she signed back. They left you behind again. I was startled. It was the first time she had ever used the phrase, left behind. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Yes, they went to Hawaii. Ivy stared at me for a long time. Then, she signed something that stopped the breath in my lungs. We have plans too. They'll be surprised. I stared at her in total confusion. She just smiled. Her eyes carried a mysterious, sharp glint I had never seen before, but nothing could have prepared me for the next morning. It was Thursday, 9:41 a.m. The house was dead quiet. Nathan and Linda had boarded their flight 3 hours earlier. I made a cup of vanilla blend coffee and carried it into Ivy's bedroom. She was lying on her side, gazing out the window at the lavender bushes. I knocked softly and pushed the door open. I brought coffee, I said gently. Ivy slowly turned her head, and then the universe tilted on its axis. She pushed the blankets aside. She planted both feet firmly on the hardwood floor, and she stood up. I froze in place. The ceramic mug slipped in my trembling hands, splashing hot coffee onto my wrist. I couldn't feel the burn. It felt like someone had muted all the sound in the room. What are you doing? I stammered. My voice sounded thin and terrified. Ivy let out a soft, melodic laugh, and then she spoke. Her voice was crystal clear, gentle, but incredibly firm. Calm down, Lucy. Don't freak out. I backed up until my shoulders hit the doorframe. Ivy, you can talk, you can walk. She took 3 solid, perfectly balanced steps toward me. I never lost the ability to walk or talk, she said calmly. It was all an act, one I had to keep up for 20 years to protect myself. I couldn't speak. My mind raced through hundreds of memories, pushing her heavy wheelchair up ramps, comforting her when Linda screamed at her, the silence, the letterboards. Why? I finally choked out. Why would you do that? Ivy sat down in a velvet armchair and motioned for me to sit on the edge of the bed. I'm Nathan's half-sister. My dad had me with his first wife. When he passed away, Linda gained full control of the estate. She looked down at her hands. I was just a burden to her. When I had that high fever at 10 years old, she deliberately waited 2 days to take me to the hospital. When I recovered, she told the neighbors I had permanent brain damage to gain sympathy and tax benefits. Ivy looked back up at me, her eyes hardening. I realized that the weaker I appeared, the less she paid attention to me. And the less attention she gave me, the more freedom I had. I chose to stay silent. I sat there, completely stunned. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together. Her knowing looks when Linda belittled me. The quiet smiles, the subtle winks. Ivy had been fully alert, watching them abuse me for over a year. But why now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why tell me this today? Ivy stood up, walked to her closet, and pulled out a sleek, hard-shell suitcase. Because we're going on a trip, she said. You didn't really think I'd sit around in this house while they sip cocktails in Hawaii, did you? My jaw practically hit the floor. You're going to Hawaii? We are going to Hawaii, she corrected. Flight, hotel, everything is booked. Dad left me a hidden trust fund of $115,000 before he died. I've kept it untouched, waiting for the right moment. She walked over to her nightstand and pulled out an old iPhone I had never seen before. And there's something else you need to see, Lucy. I've been accessing Linda's iPad when she sleeps. She handed me the phone. I opened the screen at exactly 10:14 a.m. My stomach dropped into a bottomless pit. It was a screenshot of a text thread between Nathan and a contact saved as Malene. Nathan, the flight is booked. Mom got Lucy to agree to stay with the vegetable. 7 days in paradise, just us. Malene, can't wait, baby. Are we talking to the lawyer when we get back? Nathan, yes. I'm moving $47,000 to the offshore LLC tomorrow so she can't touch it in the divorce. She's completely clueless. I stopped breathing. The words blurred together on the glowing screen. She's completely clueless. I screenshot the image and forwarded it to my own phone. I created a new folder in my gallery. I titled it Evidence. He spent $12,400 of marital funds on Malene's ticket and hotel suite, Ivy said quietly. He's planning to file for divorce the moment he returns, claiming you were emotionally neglectful. He wants to leave you with absolutely nothing. I sat on the edge of the bed in total silence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the timestamp on the text message. Yesterday, 4:12 p.m. While he was eating the dinner I cooked for him, he was finalizing my destruction. Lucy? Ivy asked softly. Are you okay? I slowly looked up at her. The confusion and the hurt were gone. They were replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. What time is our flight? I asked. 12 hours later, we landed at Honolulu International Airport. It was a completely different reality. Ivy wore a loose white linen shirt, designer sunglasses, and walked with total confidence. I walked beside her, my posture straight, my phone securely in my pocket, holding every piece of digital evidence Ivy had gathered over the last 6 months. Ivy had booked us a room in the exact same luxury resort in Waikiki, just in a different tower, all paid for in cash from her hidden trust. We spent the afternoon in our suite, going over bank statements and email chains Ivy had systematically exported. At 6:15 p.m., Ivy opened a restaurant reservation app on her phone. His mom booked a table at the poolside restaurant for 7 p.m. tonight. I slipped the maitre d' $100 to let me plant something under their table before they arrived. She held up a tiny black digital audio recorder. She was building a case, I whispered to myself, and I was about to see it executed perfectly. At 6:45 p.m., we walked down to the outdoor deck. I wore a simple navy dress. Ivy wore an emerald silk jacket. We positioned ourselves behind a thick row of decorative palm trees, completely hidden in the shadows, just 10 feet from table 42. At 7:02 p.m., they arrived. My heart pounded violently against my ribs. I watched my husband pull out a chair for a young, polished blonde woman, Malene. She rested her hand casually on Nathan's thigh. He leaned in and kissed her cheek. Linda sat across from them, raising a glass of expensive white wine, beaming with pride. There was no guilt, no hesitation, just a family celebrating their successful deception. Ivy handed me a small wireless earpiece connected to the recorder under their table. I pressed it into my right ear. Immediately, Linda's sharp voice flooded into my head. She's never been anything special, Linda laughed. Hasn't done a thing for this family, just a glorified maid. Nathan's voice followed, low and arrogant. My lawyer says if we play the emotional neglect angle, I won't have to give her a dime of the house equity. I could even come out ahead. I just have to tolerate her for 1 more week. Malene giggled. She really thinks you're just on a family trip. She believes whatever I tell her, Nathan said dismissively. I pulled the earpiece out. My hands were no longer trembling. The silence in my head was absolute. Ivy looked at me in the dim light. She didn't ask if I was ready. She already knew. I took a deep breath, clutching the phone, holding the screenshots and the live audio feed. I didn't know it then, but the next 10 minutes would completely erase the man sitting at that table. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, staring at the digital evidence on my phone while Ivy slept peacefully in the next room. Every time the air conditioning unit clicked on, my body flinched like I expected Nathan to walk through the door. At 8:14 a.m. the next morning, my phone buzzed. A text message from Nathan. Nathan. Morning, honey. Hawaii is beautiful but missing you. How's Ivy doing? I stared at the screen. The audacity was almost physical. He was laying next to his mistress, texting me to check on the sister he thought was helpless, all while preparing to drain my bank accounts. I didn't respond immediately. I let him wait. 30 minutes later, I typed a single, perfectly crafted lie. Me. She's doing fine. We're just watching movies. Have fun. I set the phone face down. My internal calm was terrifying. I had already made my decision. Over the next 4 days, Ivy and I prepared. We didn't spend our time lounging on the beach. We spent it building a fortress of undeniable proof. Ivy had copies of Linda's tax returns from the years she claimed Ivy was totally dependent. I had screenshots of Nathan's offshore LLC transfers. On Tuesday afternoon, I went down to the hotel's business center. I paid $14.50 to print out 80 pages of documents, bank statements, text threads, audio transcripts. I slid the thick stack of papers into a heavy manila folder. I placed it in my tote bag. Copies of everything. At 4 p.m. on Wednesday, Nathan texted me again. Nathan, our flight lands tomorrow at 2 p.m. Mom wants to do a big family dinner at the house to celebrate being back. 7 p.m. See you then. He was setting the stage. A family dinner to officially end my marriage. He wanted an audience when he delivered the final blow. Me. I'll be there. Thursday evening arrived. I stood in front of the mirror in Nathan's parents' guest bathroom. I put on my navy cashmere scarf, the most expensive thing I owned. It was a gift I bought for myself with my first bonus from the bank. It reminded me that I had worth before I met him. At exactly 6:50 p.m., I walked Ivy out to the living room. She sat down in her wheelchair. She placed her hands softly in her lap. We looked at each other one last time. No words, just a mutual understanding that the war was about to begin. At 7:05 p.m., the front door unlocked. Nathan walked in first, dropping his heavy suitcase. His skin was glowing with a fresh tan. Linda followed close behind, wearing a bright floral dress, looking vibrant and powerful. The dining room table was set for 8 people, even though there were only 4 of us. Nathan's aunt and uncle arrived 10 minutes later, holding bottles of wine, completely unaware of the execution Nathan had planned. We sat down at 7:30 p.m. The room smelled like roasted chicken, expensive perfume, and lies. For the first 20 minutes, Nathan played the perfect husband. He poured my wine. He smiled at his aunt. He completely ignored his sister, sitting silently in her wheelchair. Then, at exactly 7:52 p.m., Nathan set his fork down. He cleared his throat. His courtroom voice filled the room. "Lucy," he started, folding his hands together on the table. "Mom and I had a lot of time to talk on this trip, and we've come to a difficult decision." The room went completely quiet. Linda sat up straighter, her eyes locked onto me, practically vibrating with anticipation. "Our marriage hasn't been working," Nathan said, his voice dripping with fake sorrow. "You've been emotionally distant. You've neglected my needs. And after a lot of thought, I've decided to file for divorce." His aunt gasped softly. Nathan held up a hand to stop her. "It's the obvious choice," Nathan continued, his tone turning clinical. "You don't have a career anymore. You don't contribute financially. My lawyer says we can handle this quietly, but you'll need to vacate the apartment by the end of the month." Linda nodded silently, taking a slow sip of her wine. "I know this is a lot. If this story is hitting you hard, you're not alone. Thousands have commented on stories like this. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss how this ends, and tell me in the comments, what would you have said right there? I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I looked at the man I had given 3 years of my life to. I smiled. I nodded slowly. I see, I said softly. Then I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany table. Before I answer, Nathan, I want to ask you something. He crossed his arms, looking annoyed. Lucy, please don't make this harder than it. When was the last time you checked your offshore LLC account? I asked. Silence. Let it breathe. 3 seconds. 5 seconds. 10. Nathan's smug expression cracked. His arms dropped slowly to his sides. What did you just say? I reached into my tote bag. I pulled out the heavy manila folder and dropped it directly onto his dinner plate. The sound was loud, sharp, and final. I asked when you last checked your offshore LLC, I repeated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Because according to these bank statements, you transferred $47,000 of marital assets on Tuesday at 9:15 a.m. while sitting in a hotel suite in Waikiki. Linda slammed her wine glass down. Lucy, what is the meaning of this? I didn't look at her. I opened the folder. I pulled out the 8x10 color photograph of Nathan and Malene kissing at the poolside restaurant. I slid it across the table to his aunt. Here is a photo of my husband in Hawaii, I said calmly. And here is the text where he told his mistress, Malene, that he was moving our money so I couldn't touch it. Quote, she's completely clueless. Nathan's face drained of blood. He looked like he was going to vomit. How did you get that? I was there, Nathan, I said. I was sitting 10 feet away from you at the poolside restaurant. That's impossible, Linda shouted, standing up from her chair. You were here. You were watching Ivy. Was I? The entire table turned toward the end of the room. Ivy pushed her chair back. She placed her hands on the armrests, and then she stood up. Aunt Sarah let out a piercing scream. A dish hit the floor, shattering into dozens of pieces. Ivy walked slowly, perfectly balanced, until she was standing directly behind Linda. Hello, Mom, Ivy said. Her voice was crystal clear. For the first time in my life, I watched my mother-in-law look genuinely afraid. Linda's knees buckled, and she collapsed back into her chair, her mouth opening and closing without sound. You've been holding her hostage for 20 years for tax benefits, I said, pulling out Linda's tax returns. And you, Nathan, used her as a decoy to abandon your wife. You both thought we were weak. You thought we were disposable. That's not fair, Nathan stammered, his hands trembling violently. You don't understand the pressure I was under at work. Stop, Uncle Richard said. His voice boomed across the room. He stood up, looking at Nathan with pure disgust. Richard, wait, Nathan pleaded. Let her speak, Richard snapped. I looked Nathan dead in the eye. I pulled out my phone and pressed play on the audio recording. Linda's voice. She's never been anything special, hasn't done a thing for this family. Nathan's voice. I won't have to give her a dime. The girl next to you looks promising. The audio filled the dining room. There was nowhere left for them to hide. You wanted to file for divorce claiming emotional neglect? I asked, my voice deadly calm. My lawyer, Marilyn Carter, filed for divorce based on documented infidelity at 8:02 a.m. this morning. We're also filing a third-party interference suit against Malene. Nathan broke. Tears spilled over his eyelashes. His entire body shook. Lucy, please, I'm begging you. If the firm finds out about the offshore account, I'll lose my job. I'm scared. 2 years ago, you said, don't overthink it, I replied, mirroring his exact words. So here's my answer, Nathan. Don't overthink it. I stood up. I picked up my bag. I didn't look at Linda. I didn't look at the shattered plate. I hear you, I said to Nathan as he sobbed quietly at the table. But you taught me that family shows up, and you never did. I walked toward the door, my heels clicking cleanly on the hardwood. Ivy walked right behind me. We walked out into the cool night air, and we didn't look back. I walked to my car, parked halfway down the block. I unlocked the doors, got into the driver's seat, and closed my eyes. The silence inside the cabin felt entirely different from the silence inside that house. This wasn't the suffocating quiet of a hostage situation. It was the peaceful quiet of an empty battlefield. I gripped the steering wheel, leaned my forehead against the cool leather, and cried. Not sad tears. It was an overwhelming, violent release of the tension I had been holding for 3 straight years. Ivy sat in the passenger seat, gently placing a hand on my shoulder. My phone vibrated at 8:42 p.m. A text from my attorney, Marilyn Carter. Marilyn, the papers were successfully served to his office. You survived the worst of it. You can survive this. The fallout over the next 3 weeks was catastrophic for them. My phone blew up with messages from Nathan's extended family. Most of them were furious at Linda for faking Ivy's disability. A few tried to defend Nathan. His aunt called me on a Tuesday morning. Lucy, you've destroyed this family. She sobbed into the receiver. He was just confused. He wasn't confused when he bought her a first-class ticket, I replied calmly. And then I hung up. I blocked her number. Nathan's life unraveled with terrifying speed. Because I had documented his attempt to hide $47,000 in marital assets in an offshore LLC, the judge ordered an immediate freeze on all of his financial accounts. When the partners at his financial consulting firm found out he was being investigated for hiding assets, a massive red flag in their industry, they placed him on unpaid administrative leave. 3 days later, he was officially fired. I heard from a mutual friend that Malene left him 2 weeks after his bank accounts were frozen. She didn't want a man who couldn't afford her hotel suites. Linda faced her own reckoning. Once Uncle Richard realized she had been collecting disability and tax benefits for Ivy under fraudulent pretenses for 2 decades, he threatened to report her to the IRS unless she signed over her portion of the family estate to Ivy. Linda, terrified of prison, agreed. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Nathan was ordered to divide our assets fairly, and because of the overwhelming evidence of infidelity and financial abuse, he was forced to pay spousal support for the next 3 years. I also won my alienation of affection lawsuit against Malene, securing a substantial settlement. When that first settlement payment hit my bank account, I looked at the $85,000 balance. I didn't feel greedy. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like I had finally bought back my voice. I used the money to move into a bright, top-floor apartment overlooking Pullen Park in downtown Raleigh. I returned to the finance industry, but this time on my own terms as an independent consultant. I only take clients I respect. I only do work that makes me feel valued. Ivy used her trust fund and the estate money to move to Asheville. She enrolled in a graphic design program. She sent me a postcard last week. It was a drawing of 2 birds flying out of a cage. On the back, she wrote exactly 4 words: "We are finally free." 2 years later, I ran into Nathan's old coworker at a coffee shop. He told me Nathan was working as a junior analyst at a tiny, no-name firm in a different state, making less than half of what he used to. Linda had been forced to sell her immaculate, perfectly organized house to pay off her mounting legal fees. She was living in a small condo, entirely alone. I'm Lucy, and that was the last time I sat at my husband's table. I'm sitting in my new apartment right now. I still have that navy cashmere scarf folded in my closet. I don't wear it often, but I keep it there because it reminds me that I was always worth the investment. I just had to be the one to make it. If you're watching this and nodding your head, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know what it feels like to shrink yourself down so small just to make someone else comfortable in their own home. But I need you to hear this. Family isn't who shares your blood or your last name. Family is who shows up when the lights go out. Silence isn't peace. Sometimes it's just postponed pain, and you don't owe anyone your life, not even the people who gave it to you, and certainly not the people who promised to protect it. Some of you are thinking, was that too harsh? Should you have given him a second chance? Let me tell you, it wasn't. People who abandon you don't get to demand your presence later. People who lie to you don't deserve your softness when the truth finally costs them something. You survived. That's what matters. If this story spoke to you, leave a comment. Tell me, what boundary changed your life? And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the moment. There are more stories to tell. Take care of yourself. Really, I mean it.